merger. So again, I think we're all set to go, so I'll turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen Systems. Don?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen, and with me is Jeff Benedict, my normal co-presenter, who heads up our ITSM practice. And hold on a second. It's not advancing.
It is not advancing. All right, there we go. Okay.
No, it is advancing.
We are truly live, folks.
And leads our innovation efforts. That's just to prove this isn't a canned recording.
Right.
If you're new to our webinar series, welcome. If you are a past attendee, thanks for joining us again. Our goal, as always, is to share valuable information and insights you can use in your planning and activities right now. The topic we'll explore today is CMDB's role in the design and delivery of IT services. After a little bit about Evergreen, we'll dive into that topic. Beyond that, we'll briefly demonstrate some of the concepts we're going to cover in our always evolving view of a very advanced self-service catalog and portal experience, which happens to be built on ServiceNow. Then we'll cover any questions if you have them. Evergreen is a U.S.-based consulting firm, and we've worked with hundreds of mid-market, Fortune 1000, and public sector organizations to help them improve their IT service management. We're a full lifecycle firm. We have both, meaning we have both process and technology in the same company. And we're one of the 5 and maybe even the top 3 U.S. service partners now and have over a decade of domain experience in each area of their portfolio. But we view all of this from a perspective of what we call customer-centric IT service management. For those of you who have been on these before, you know that at Evergreen, traditional ITSM thinking is wrong because it puts the customer, the people whom we're really doing this for, last. Hard to believe, but true. If you look at the little customer down there in the bottom of the screen, it's almost like that game, Where's Waldo, right? Here I am. So you wonder, how can this happen? There's a couple of reasons for it. First is probably tradition. This is how it's always been done, so we do it that way. Second, maybe we don't know how to put the customer first. What are the best practices? What do they want? How do we build it? Maybe we don't know. And third, we do know traditional ITSM really well, so we do that. Unfortunately, it's wrong. We need to start with the customer, and if we do, it will change what we do. A couple of quick examples. For example, rather than thinking about how to handle incidents, we'll focus more energy on how to eliminate or automate them. For change, rather than thinking about managing change, maybe instead we'll think about how to eliminate or streamline changes. For knowledge, it can become search and learn, a powerful place for social enablement. If we start with the customer, it changes what we do. So let's go ahead and dive in. As we often do, there are a few idle definitions that can serve as a useful basis for getting us all on the same page. These 4 are relevant today: Service Manager, Configuration Item, Configuration Management, and CMDB. The Service Manager is the person responsible for the delivery of a specific service. Now you could say that's easy. If I'm the person who provisions the database, then that is my service and I control it, and that's simple. But what if it's just one element of delivering a complete computing capability in support of a critical application? Who owns that compound service? A configuration item, or CI, is a managed component. It's not just technology. It can be a process, documentation. It can even be people. It's anything we want to track and account for over time. Configuration management is the process that maintains accurate information about those things that are used to deliver IT services. The natural extension is that we need to know we can rely on those things to be ready and right when we need to deliver an IT service. The CMDB is simply a place where we store this data over time and how it relates to the other data, or the CIs. We create and use a lot of tools and artifacts in our consulting work. Last webinar, I offered a copy of our Service Taxonomy User's Guide, and quite a few of you requested it. So today I have another item you might be interested in. It's our Services Definition Dictionary. Oops, looks like this took off on its own. This is quite an interesting presentation.
It is. And everyone missed the music it was playing earlier by
itself. Okay, so let me tell you about this very briefly. We reviewed all the idle definitions and extracted out any related to services, including design, delivery, and management. Then we added or extended definitions where idle is not sufficient in our thinking. And if you get the document, you can tell the idle terms are in black. Our additions or modifications are in green, so you can tell the difference. And last, believe it or not, there are some idle service definitions we don't recommend you use. So we have this built in two sections. One is recommended, and the other is not recommended. It's a 13-page document. If you're interested, at the end, I'll tell you how you can get a copy of it. So why is the CMDB failed? The reasons are important if we don't want to make the same mistakes again. The biggest reason by far is it was a solution in search of a problem. As we often see in IT, we're really good at doing things. We tackle big complex things and wrestle them to the ground in a large-scale way. But we aren't really good at asking why or how will this be used. Does that make sense? And what's the least we can do rather than the most? Even though IDLE defined the CMDB, there weren't really any best practices for how to succeed with the CMDB. So we were on our own. The amount of detail we began to capture was massive, and we got lost in it. Then, as we involved others in that effort, since we didn't know why we were collecting the data, we lacked purpose we could share with them to help us all do the same thing. It's also fair to say that there's plenty of devil in the details. Data sources are all over the map, inconsistent, inaccurate, duplicative, and contradictory. Our Big Bang approach to collecting and storing all the data probably didn't help either. Last, I think it's fair to say that manually maintained CMDBs at other than the highest, most simple levels are not sustainable, and they shift constantly in a virtualized or cloud-based future. Without really good application discovery technology, it's just not very viable. So what has changed to make things different now? Innovative IT organizations are really beginning to understand that their value isn't delivering what the customer needs and wants in a high-quality experience, meeting their expectations. But they don't actually have to provide the solution because the customer doesn't care about that. They just have to make it available for quality consumption. This, in turn, is leading IT to focus on services, true services, rather than just technical outcomes, which is fueling the emergence of the role of the service manager. That is really a critical factor right there. Someone who owns the outcome the customer really wants end to end. There's quite a bit of difference between the role of a technical manager and the role of a service manager. This slide is a bit of a simplification, but it isn't incorrect. You can see that as a service manager, you have many more questions you need answers to. These questions come up when we see the service from the customer's eyes. Notice the bold blue items on the right-hand side. These are questions where accurate configuration management information helps the service manager. It's 75% of those questions. So the differences now make the CMDB essential. Here are 5 foundational elements only the CMDB can bring to the delivery of IT services. Modular and reusable, end-to-end, true cost of service, KPIs the customer cares about, and top-to-bottom visibility. Let's take a brief look at these. We want to build modular services and manage them as CIs. Let's start with that premise. It's important to apply a building block mentality to constructing services, then combine the blocks to create new services and variations of existing ones. If all your services are single-threaded, custom-built, they're very expensive to create, impossible to maintain, and confusing to the customer. Think about Amazon. What would it be like if every area in Amazon had its own checkout procedure? But this idea has challenges too. Each service module, and I use this is a great example. Say we've got a module called Financial Approval Process, could be used in hundreds of services. So service configuration management is mandatory, with each service being managed as a CI and mapped into any combined services of which it is a part. Every service we deliver is made up of lots of little services. And even though one person, let's say John Smith, owns the big service, there are lots of little services being combined all over IT to make up the big one. This is part of what scares John. because he doesn't control those people. They don't actually work for him. So how can he possibly be successful? So John begins explaining to everyone delivering services to him how important they are, how they fit into the big scheme, and what the customer really wants. John creates meaningful mission alignment because just mechanically doing a task is not very emotionally fulfilling. But helping a customer as part of a team, that is. And every day, John will work with everyone, giving feedback, helping them improve, streamlining, encouraging the effort, and making sure they see their part in the big picture. How does the CMDB help John? It provides the detail in each sub-service: availability, time to provision, quality of service, service issue resolution, and service outage restoration that allow John to see his service end to end, fix it when it's broken, and continually improve it for the customer. Most IT organizations are of a pretty low level of maturity when it comes to IT costing. This prevents IT from driving customer choice or participating in the fundamental conversation in business of cost and benefit trade-offs. As we move to IT services, IT organizations are beginning to see this as a mandatory rather than nice to have, and that definitely is the case. Whether we actually get cost reimbursement or just do show back costing, it still affects behavior, creating better customer understanding and better customer decision making. Just as importantly, allows us, the providers, to create standard bundled Happy Meal offerings around the 3 or 4 activities we do most of the time, represented by these little orange services on the left-hand side. In this way, we simplify the customer's decision-making and the work of IT. CMDB, we can't do this without it. KPIs cascade down in a pyramid, from the customer to the service manager to the providers. And the KPIs become SLAs, and SLAs become OLAs as we go down. And then all those OLAs and SLAs roll back up to KPIs. So it's kind of a continuous circle for improvement. With the CMDB enabling a modular, reusable sub-service approach, we can even trial build a prospective service, a service we might want to offer, and look at what the performance and delivery might look like end-to-end simply by adding up the sub-service SLAs and OLAs around delivery times and performance, and even cost. That'd be pretty cool to be able to sort of try out a prospective service that way. If we use the CMDB and we use CIs correctly, we could certainly do it. A lot of what we have traditionally done in the CMDB was below this double line down here in the middle. The hardware and software technology components and their relationships to each other. For our purposes today, I'm calling this the discovered infrastructure. Above the line, up here, here's my pointer, there it is, are the services. A service consists of people, processes, descriptions, functionality, options, and commitments, as well as technology underpinnings. Most of what makes up a service CI cannot be discovered. But that may not be a huge problem because the service isn't as hard to track as moving technology is. You can see that each orange service above is consumed by some customer. That customer may be another service, or it may be the actual end customer. It doesn't really matter. One of our general principles is, which we find is a very clarifying thought, is everyone has customers and everyone has services. If you think of it that way, you get an immediate thinking that's aligned. It is relatively easy as a service owner to add and track consumers of your service, as well as adding and tracking the sub-service you consume to deliver your service. This makes it pretty easy to discover, quote unquote, your services map in the CMDB, at least above the 2 lines. The coolest part, if you follow the process, it's always accurate. For the example above, the dotted lines going down on the left and right side kind of show our service from the top to the bottom. Here's a simple flow diagram showing adding customers and adding sub-services. Let's say I'm the service manager. I get requests from potential new customers to be consumers of my service. These may be end customers or perhaps another provider who will use my service as a sub-service in their delivery. When I accept this request, the new customer is added to my active customers in configuration management. So I know at all times Who is consuming my service? The same is true if someone requests removal of service. Configuration management is updated. If we go a little bit further down here, where's my pointer? Here we go. This side of the slide. As a service manager, I can also see other services by other providers that are listed in the CMDB. Let's say I find one that will add value to my service. I can request access as a customer to this service, which becomes a sub-service for me or a supporting service. At the same time, the sub-service provider has a new customer, me. So here are a couple of best practice tips for success in configuration management and services. First one is that we ought to recognize that the term CMDB may be viewed as bad. Perhaps, if it is and has a negative connotation, perhaps use the term configuration management instead, because you might need a fresh term where you can define it for the organization and it doesn't come in pre-labeled. You will be experimenting with some new ideas and concepts, most likely, so keep it safe for learning. Begin top-down with 3 or 4 key services and map the pieces at a high level, maybe down to the applications that support the services. But don't get lost in the noise below that, not at this point. Think modular. Create CIs and use your change management process for linking them. Assign service managers just to get a feel for the pieces that make up a service and the expectations around delivery. Identify the sub-service managers and include them. Last, if you can do it, try creating a service manager's workspace, which is essentially the place where they go to manage their service. Here's a quick look at the service manager workspace we provide in our solution out of the box. The idea behind it is to make it the one place where the service manager goes to reactively and proactively manage their service every day. It is a workspace. I've said this before, kind of like a cockpit in an airplane. It's not just a dashboard. Today, it includes information on customer satisfaction, service quality, service availability, service delivery, and on and on. We are constantly adding to it and working on more proactive measures. I think you'll probably see some today. So we'll finish up with pitfalls to avoid. Wow, I made good pace on this one.
You're rolling.
Well, it is very tempting to jump right in and start building services across different parts of IT. We call these rifle shots. While they can be done quickly, they are each unique. No reuse, no consistency, no manageability, and very confusing to the customer. It looks like no thought went into it, and that's right. While the individual service might be okay, the overall perspective is not good. If you do create a beautiful portal for customers, and we have many customers who start that way, you will see demand for services rise very quickly. It's important to resist that rush until you have a consistent service design process well in place, or you will soon have a lot of services that are rifle shots. It's easy to focus mostly on building new services. But bear this in mind, customers want high-quality services consistently delivered. That is more about operate than build. So remember to think past build in your service design and service thinking. Last, when building your management points in a service, don't just think SLAs and OLAs. That's the stuff we know. That's our stuff in IT. But start with the customer. What are their KPIs? What do they really want? If you do that and then cascade it down, you can build something they want and will love, but you can also deliver. I'll now turn it over to Jeff, and I think he'll probably demo some of these concepts in action.
Okay, great. And while I'm handing the control over to Jeff, just a reminder, especially to those of you who joined us late, to view the presentation in full screen mode. You will see once Jeff shares his slides, there will be double arrows above the top right-hand corner of the slide window. If you click on those double arrows, it'll go to full screen. It'll be much easier to see what Jeff is presenting. And also to submit your questions, please use the Q&A panel and send those questions to all panelists. That way I can assign them. Thanks, and I'll hand it over to Jeff.
Great, thanks Stephanie, thanks Don. So I'm going to kind of start where I oftentimes start. So we're in our kind of self-service portal. This is built on the content management system of ServiceNow. And this is, you know, a portal where users can consume information about the services that we've talked about so far, right? Where they can submit service requests, and then logically they can track the status of those requests. So one kind of avenue in here is there is a service catalog section where we can go and see the published list of services. And this is organized in kind of a category or taxonomy kind of perspective. And again, part of the displaying this is to provide transparency to our customers, clarify those SLAs, KPIs, and expectations that we're going to deliver, but also kind of put it in language that allows us to communicate more appropriately with our particular customers. One thing I want to highlight while I'm here is there are multiple catalogs, so you can segment out your different services in different kind of groupings or catalogs. And so, for example, we'll stick into IT for today for the most part. And, you know, our focus today is really kind of, I'm going to focus in on mostly the service owner and also how CMDB data can, you know, benefit the service owner as well as the service consumers. So I'm going to move first to kind of the services I own section out here, which is where I can see those services that I am actually listed as the service owner. And so first I'll look at this expense management service, which will be my kind of main service of today. And so this is what we consider our service tombstone or brochure page. And this is the information that we're conveying to our consumers. So they can see what, you know, the summary of our service, who it's available to. They can see what's in scope, what's out of scope as far as our service. Our different offerings and commitments are listed here. We're also communicating health and status of our service. Any outages and alerts would be reported here. And we're also giving them an opportunity to provide feedback, submit enhancement ideas, and ultimately drive improvements to our service. One other thing you'll see up here at the top, too, frequently asked questions. So we're also showing a slice of our knowledge base to help consumers interact with our service and get help with some of the, you know, common questions or common challenges others might have. One last thing here, there is things you can request in context to the service. So this is where someone could go to actually request and become a new subscriber to our service, which in this case is getting access to and the software that underpins our expense management service. Let me go back. So I mentioned we're kind of looking at this from a service owner perspective. So there are a couple options that I have as a service owner up here. One is the dashboard, which we'll look at in a second. Another option is to actually edit the service. So let's move to the dashboard. So this is something Don obviously just talked about. And so this is my kind of cockpit, my management environment. And some of the things I can see from the start, any active incidents that are reported against my service, I can track and manage them here. They're going to report based off of whether they're in alignment with our commitments. Same for requests, which I can see one is actually in a breach situation. I can also manage my individual subscribers, solicit feedback, kind of in this little tile widget area as well. On the right, here are my service metrics. This is really probably the area I care most about because these are my commitments that I've promised to deliver. In this case, our availability, how quickly we resolve priority 1 incidents, as well as how quickly we respond and deliver on service requests related to access to our particular service. The other kind of area or metric that I care about is service quality and service satisfaction, which manage that through ratings and feedback. And I can also, through these feedbacks, I can also use this as a vehicle to collaborate and share information with my consumers. So I can use this kind of place to maybe communicate service updates, assist people who are having trouble with our particular service, or resolve or work through feedback they've provided. So to complete this dashboard a little bit, I'll fill out a few more things. I also have options in here to add reports to my kind of dashboard. So I'm going to drop a couple of our template reports that we have out here. Save that. And what that's going to do is just add some pre-canned reports that we have that kind of slice based off of our service, in this case showing any of my request trends and incident trends that are related to my service. Obviously, we could personalize and create unique reports to ultimately manage the health and the activities contextually relevant to our given service that we're managing. One last area I wanted to hit on here in this page is there is a place where we can view the dependency maps of our service. And this is a graphical map that will, kind of show this service as well as the components that it depends upon. At this point, you can kind of see our service is a bit lonely here, kind of sitting all by itself, but we'll fix that here in a moment. So I'm going to go to edit. So here's our edit screen, a form, and this is where we would go into, move it from a classification perspective, change the description, change the primary support group behind our service. Right, this is where we edit our different items. You could request in context to this, our scope information, as well as any of our reports. So one thing I want to do here just to kind of highlight kind of the commitments aspect in delivering on these commitments is I'm going to go add a new kind of service offering. So we currently have a standard offering, so I'm just going to add a new one, call it premium. And I'll make it cost a little more because it's going to have some better delivering more value with this premium offering, so people should pay more for that. So I will just copy our existing one by inserting, and then we will attach different commitments to this. So in here I'm going to just find some different ones. So we'll choose our standard one had an 8-hour resolution time for priority ones. We'll make this one a 4-hour, so it's a little bit better. We'll put a 99.9% availability. That'll be a little better than what we had on our other one as well. And then access requests. So in essence, we're going to have a new offering people can opt into. And then obviously our delivery, our management of those are going to have different thresholds. And one of the things that's happening right now is it is going through our history of activities and calculating our actual delivery or measurements on these 3 different commitments to date. So I'll let it kind of churn here for a second. The other thing I'll mention with this is we can have a kind of standard definition of commitments, but we can also extend this and add our own kind of commitments unique to a specific service offering. The other thing I want to do is I want our service to be dependent on another service. So what I can do, and this is where our CMDB comes into play, I can actually add a relationship between this service and either infrastructure components, or I can also relate it to other sub-services that, that this expense management service may depend on. So I'm going to say it depends on our identity management service. Create a relationship there. Now if I scroll down, I'll see a whole bunch of new relationships that I have. And if I refresh our map, I'll kind of see this a little more graphically. So now what we have is our expense management services depend on our identity management service, which is comprised of some applications that run on a server. And then some of the applications also depend on other components, other services as well. All right, so the value of this is now any of these components and their health as well as their activities are going to be relevant to, kind of contextually relevant to our expense management service. So let me show you that. So for example, let's create an outage for one of these components. I'll show you what happens to our services. So I will say server is unresponsive, and I'll choose the server here, which if I show you the map, this is going to start it from the ground up. So we're starting with this server here, and you'll see that it actually is a critical server to our identity management service, which also supports our newly related expense management, but also supports some other services out there as well for Workday and Salesforce.com. Right. So we got this incident. Let me create an outage off of this. I'll report our outage information kind of the same. Server is unresponsive. And we'll say begin outage now. And one of the things that happens here is look under our outages tab. we had created one outage for this one server, but all of a sudden now we have 9 outage records created. So in essence what it's doing is it's broadcasting the outages to all the impacted parts. And there's some rules behind this to define how these impacted parts or what should be considered in an outage state versus the other. But these basically become synchronized. So we could actually go backwards in time, and I could say this actually occurred, say, yesterday at 8 a.m. Save that, import that. And notice all of them now say 8 a.m. as well. The other thing I want to do at this point, too, I do want to kind of refresh our metrics. And normally that's just something that happens kind of in the middle or after hours of the scheduled job. But I want our dashboard to actually refresh. I guess before I get there, let me just come out to kind of the home page, and I'll show you what a user would see. First of all, our widget out here on the right now shows we have 5 active outages, which I can come out to this to see more detail. And here's our various services that were impacted. I also see outage information up here in my notifications and alerts, noting to me the services that I depend on, that they're currently in an outage situation. The ones in blue are interesting because these are actually for me as the service owner to say there's an outage to your particular service. Please go take a look at it and provide some additional details or information about that service. So for example, as a service owner, I can come out here, and I can do this in a variety of places, but I can do it from my dashboard, for example. I can come out here and report, kind of clarify the outage information and use this as a way to communicate to my consumers how it's actually, how we're actually handling and dealing with this particular service outage. So the other thing I want to highlight here, so now if we look at our kind of service metrics area, for one, we have a number of additional ones here now because we have 2 offerings that have 2 different sets of commitments, right? And we also have, now that our availability, we have an outage that has spanned, basically a day and a half. You'll notice that some of our actual metrics are now in a breach or a breach situation of us not delivering on those commitments. So you can see, obviously, our higher level service, our premium service, we actually would have, just by being down for a day and a half, have already missed our target for the year. The other thing I want to highlight is by building that relationship between our expense management service and the identity management service. So that supports kind of the health and by using the dependent parts as a component of driving its health. The other thing that the relationship can do for us is actually help with driving the request fulfillment activities related to a service. Let me show you an example here. So this is our request access to concur requestable item. In the workflow behind this item, one of the first things that it does in this workflow is it checks whether or not our current expense management service is related and dependent on identity management. If it is, then it runs a workflow that's unique to our identity management service to handle the provisioning of the account. Otherwise, it falls back to some tasks assigned to the expense management fulfillment group to actually set up that account, through a task basis and not through a sub-services basis. So let me, we'll go and request this, and I'll show you this kind of in action. I'm going to go in as somebody else, just since I'm already the service owner. I want someone else to be a subscriber. I'm logged in as somebody called Alice Smith, and she can come out here. Actually, I'll do this through a search. And we'll minimize this. So she can request access to Concur. Just order this and say we need to log expense reports. So we order the item, and basically we're thrown into a tracking page. And the reason we're thrown into this tracking page is this item is actually delivered without any human interaction. So she can kind of keep track of this or watch this thing from beginning to end. And just open up the workflow here to see the details. But you'll see, so now that we have that relationship between expense management and identity management, it actually went through the route of we're going to use our identity management subservice to do the provisioning, which had its own flow out here, which is actually already complete. And then after our identity management service is complete, we do some additional activities to provision rights, validate access, deliver those accounts, and then kind of mark it as complete. And it looks like it's all done. So on this page, we can kind of see that it's gone through all the various steps and activities, and there aren't any errors or issues with giving her access. So now she's now a subscriber to our expense management service, which she would have then gotten a notification with access information to get to that service and start using the software behind it. Further, if I come back out to our dashboard again, I'll go to expense management. So it's right there already. And we'll go to the dashboard. As the owner right now, see that we have a new subscriber, Alice Smith, to our expense management service. I also have opened up my subscribers. I'll see her in the list as well as a new subscriber, and I can solicit feedback of her as part of this. So, I mean, this is kind of an example of it. I wanted to highlight this as an example where we can use these services as, you know, components or building blocks to other services. So, you know, again, these building blocks are configuration items and would be managed as part of the CMDB. And the last topic I want to hit on here is these relationships to services as it pertains to change management. So, let's say, for example, that we're going to make a change to, you know, a component of our identity management service. In this case, I'll choose one of those applications that we had. So we'll do this, and we'll say we're upgrading to version 6.2. And I'm going to schedule this for Friday. We'll just say 9 p.m. to, let's say 11 p.m. So I create my change, and one of the first things I want to highlight here is you'll see, again, using our relationships of our CMDB are now showing me what are my configuration items that are affected by this particular change, and specifically what are my services that are affected by this particular change. And so these are, you know, again, as a service owner, I would now care about this change, even though it's not directly related to my service. It's related to a component that my service depends on. And to take this a step further, if I do check conflicts, one of the things that we'll see out here is that I've already set up a schedule for my service that says I'm only going to allow maintenance that affects my service at a particular time. And my particular schedule is I only want changes that impact my service to occur on Saturdays from 1 to 4 a.m. Well, if you remember, I scheduled this at Friday evening. This is outside the window of my agreed to maintenance schedule for my impacted service. You know, this is probably a case, obviously, where, you know, a change manager is likely not to know the intricacies of these dependencies and impacts to schedules. So a tool like ServiceNow can be, you know, helpful in terms of arming a service, you know, change manager, service manager, as well as, you know, an implementer to know that this is not an ideal time to make a change to this particular software, given the fact that it impacts some of the maintenance agreements that we have with our given services. So let me move this to Saturday instead, just to show. We'll alleviate this this outage or this conflict. Move it to 2 to 4. Should be within our window. If I recheck conflicts, now it says there are no conflicts. So we're now inside our maintenance window. The next part I wanted to show real quickly here is, so this workflow routes to my approver or my manager first as the one who submitted this change. But then after that, it'll actually look at, I'll show you this in the workflow first. It'll look at any of the impacted services and who the owners are and kind of ask them to authorize and approve this particular change as it impacts their given service. And then after that, there's also a route to the change advisory board to approve this change as well. So if you notice here, these are my impacted services. Here's all our owners of our different services, and I have 2 services out here that are impacted by this change. And so I'm obviously included on here because I'm a service owner, so it's asking for me to approve this change to make sure that I'm okay with this this change as it would impact my service and my service consumers. One last thing I want to hit here is, So these plan changes are also communicated out here in this same dashboard. So if I come out here, I'll have my outages and alerts, but there's also an area for plan maintenance. So this is where we'll see those change records and the impact of the different services. And again, this is login specific in the sense that if these services that I'm not a consumer of or I don't care about, I wouldn't see these. But these are, probably a mechanism to communicate to our service consumers that here's the expectation of when you're not going to have these different services available to you, or they're going to be undergoing some sort of maintenance activity. So that concludes what I kind of hope to show today. I thank you for the time, and I hope this was helpful in seeing kind of how CMDB and Service Catalog can kind of play together to support those goals of those service commitments, as well as delivering solutions that to our customers.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. I'm glad that you didn't leave that service out there lonely. There's nothing worse than a lonely service. Something that, kind of interesting, you took the conversation about the relationship much further, because in the event side, we're able, because of service linkages in the configuration management, we're able to show related service impacts from an event standpoint. I don't think a lot of organizations probably do that very well today. It tends to be hard to do that service to service, so there's some value in that. And the other thing in the conflict change checking, you can really, by the sort of the ability to trial the service or to look through it, you can shape your change to make it most likely to be approved, right, by your forward-looking ability. And so that knowledge of impacted services allows you to look at that, right? And then it's great if we can give that kind of power to a change proposer to build changes they know will get approved. So thank you. So I'll get to this slide here. Here are some possible next steps if you're interested. We do have the ability to demo the self-service catalog and portal, which Jeff was showing you today. It's available, self-service. You can get your own login on our website, and you follow a front page banner. Now, there are a number of things in there where you have to be a system administrator to do some of the things he did. And so if you find you're not seeing everything you want to see, let us know, and we can arrange a private demo for you of it with all that functionality as well. Perhaps another opportunity, you might be considering a broader service catalog initiative, but maybe challenged where to start, what to do. We have a one-day on-site workshop for up to 15 people, and the goal is to educate the team, create a common language and direction, and lay out kind of a high-level approach to solving this problem, getting traction. We find it saves a lot of time, and we feel like it's a real value at $39.50, which includes the travel. Last, as I mentioned earlier, if you would like a copy of our services definition dictionary, just reply via email. We'll be in touch with you to get it to you. So that's all we have today for the presentation, and we'll go to the wrap-up and questions, if you guys have any submitted so far.
We do, and just bear with me. I've got to kind of scroll through a few here. Quick answer, yes, we are based in the United States, for someone who just asked me that. Let me start at the top here, because we got a number of them coming in, Jeff, during your presentation. So, let's see. Okay. Okay, we have, Jeff, Frank says, I assume you have limited the available relationships for a service. And then he adds, I think you have limited the types of relationships. If so, how did you decide which relationships between services are available?
So there's no say limits. There's what you have in ServiceNow as far as the adding a relationship between two different CMDB items is you have suggestions of if I'm going to do a depends on relationship, then it would suggest that these are the types of CIs or configuration items that would be typically involved in a depends on relationship between, say, a service and something else. So, that's one of the first selections I had in that related item or related add a relationship area that shows depends on, and then it will, kind of filter my list based off the types of configuration items that would likely have a depends on relationship to a service. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so, and then he had added, but I think you addressed this in the demo. I also assume that this logical relationship is required for a service, otherwise you'd have an orphan, correct? I think that's
correct, yes.
Yeah, you've covered that, okay. Have another question. Do you have any application portfolio or technology portfolio features?
I mean, yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I mean, certainly from a service catalog and service portfolio perspective, you know, you're managing your different services, and oftentimes those will have, if it's software that we're developing, you'll have kind of an offshoot to do SDLC and, you know, manage the actual releases and builds of your different software. And ServiceNow does have, you know, an SDLC and application, you know, management kind of aspect to it, if that's what they're asking.
We are, and maybe the other part of that question, Jeff, we are developing a service portfolio capability in the platform now, and we should have that out by the end of the year, where you'll be able to see, you know, you'll have the capability to manage the full life cycle of your service from cradle to grave, and then apply governance, quality metrics, performance management, all those things across the different phases of the service's useful life. So that will be a fully functional services portfolio. That may be part of that question as well, because an application portfolio, services portfolio, I think there's some analogousness to that.
Okay. All right. Does one need to have the service portfolio module within ServiceNow to do the work you have demonstrated?
To do it completely, yes. So I mean, the service portfolio, and it's really it's a plugin that you can activate. Anyone that has a ServiceNow and an ITSM license or an ITSA license will have access to that plugin. Really, what it's doing is it's adding additional attributes to manage your services. And so the aspects I showed today of creating the offerings and the commitments is unique to that service portfolio plugin, and so you wouldn't, those are basically extensions to your configuration management repository.
Okay, great. And Jeff, I got clarification from Brian, who had asked, do you have any application portfolio or technology portfolio features? And then he added a list of applications with end of service dates. Does that clarify it?
To some degree, yeah. I mean, there is an area in ServiceNow where you can define, and there again, part of your CMDB, you can define applications, and you could certainly define a, you know, kind of a service end date to those applications as an attribute you can manage on those. And then you obviously manage, you know, kind of your changes around the actual deprovisioning of that application.
Okay, thanks. Another kind of follow-up question to the relationship question. The relationships can be almost limitless, and I would think this would run away, in quotes, very quickly. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think obviously you want to keep your relationship maps to be meaningful and provide, you know, the right level of insight you need in order to support your various processes. Typically what I would say is you need to probably start with kind of what are the business reasons for consuming that relationship information, like as we just kind of showed today, event management and being able to draw a linkage between say an incident and an outage to what services are impacted. You know, is there a reason for having that relationship definition there, doing the plan changes. But you know, oftentimes we see people that do try to boil the ocean with, I want this relationship map to have every linkage known to man down to a switch port level, and so you just need to kind of go about it in what are we trying to solve from a business purpose, and what kind of, you know, how am I going to consume that data, and that should help, you know, put some governance around how deep and how wide you go with building relationships between your different configuration components.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. I've got one for Don. CMDB seems like a core component for success in delivering IT services. What are the other essential components?
Okay. Besides the service catalog and portal, which Jeff just demoed, the things that we would that we would require as essential, it would say would be essential, would be the service design process, the service taxonomy, and the service portfolio. Those would be the big pieces.
Okay, great. And also, Don, this is probably for you as well. Can Evergreen help a company that has already built a lot of, quote, rifle shot services? How would you help them?
Yeah, that's not uncommon actually, because we have a number of customers that have already done a lot of things, and probably the best way to answer it is that a lot of those services is kind of like a ball of tangled fishing line, or it can sort of become that. You have to untangle it. So probably the first step is to look at the 80-20 of it. Which are the services that are really valuable, really being used, and sort of sort that, and that'll knock out a lot that you just don't have to pay attention to yet. Leave them on the side for the meantime. Then what we would do is organize those services logically aligned with the target customers that consume them, and that would give us, we could use the service taxonomy to help us do that, right? So it gives us some logical alignment with consumption, and then we would make them consistently consumable in the service catalog with the services, we call them tombstones, for lack of a better term, that Jeff said. It's that service, it's the service offering kind of document area or space area that describes what it is. And then those descriptions, we'd have a consistently consumable way for the right customers to hit them. Then last, we would look, this is assuming that those services which are being used are okay. They're not terrible. They work, right? The last thing we would do is then look to re-engineer those for consistency, reuse, applying a building block configuration mentality to those key services that are worth the effort. So that's the last step you would take in that kind of process.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, going back to you for a minute. In your examples, how many total services does a typical organization offer? We have viewed a service as a collection of, quote, requestable items.
I'm not sure. I guess I don't know if Don wants to weigh in on this. I'm not sure there's I guess a gold standard or a common as far as the number of total services that a typical organization may offer. I think obviously you first have to kind of get some alignment on what we define as a service versus a service offering versus a request item, and that obviously is going to shape to a large degree kind of how many different services are going to ultimately be defined and laid out.
Yeah, I can sort of add to that. A simple way to kind of attack that problem is starting with the customer and where they would expect to see and what would they expect to see and what's really valuable, right? That's sort of one way to start to begin the conversation and to sort what you have. And then the challenge becomes a design trade-off conversation. If you think about it, you can have a couple of very complex services with a lot of attributes, a lot of functionality, a lot of options, a lot of depth, and they can be very hard to manage and to understand from a service delivery standpoint, right? They're complex. Then you could, on the other side of that paradigm, you could take that same set and break it down to 100 discrete services, which would all be individual, razor-thin kind of activity sets. And at that point, there are too many of them for the customer to be able to distinguish them, right? So you've got this balance between the two that you have to affect. And kind of a general rule of thumb when we're working in a taxonomy view is you get down to a service level at the farthest end where it's most granular. The customer can absorb 8 or 10 options if they make sense, but they can't understand 20, 30, or 50, right? And so that's how you kind of look at it. It's a balance between complexity and customer understandability, right? So you have to strike that balance point in that conversation. And we have a way to do it, but I can't really probably can't talk about it in much more detail today on the webinar. But it's a great question.
Jeff, another question for you. Any thoughts to how Service Watch will impact your setup?
Yeah, so I mean, where Service Watch would fit into or kind of overlap with what I showed today is, so first of all, in our relationship map, we had our identity management service and then the applications and the servers that made up that identity management service. That's something that Service Watch could auto-discover for you, right, to build those relationships between a service and the different components that make up that service. The other area where Service Watch would fit into is the kind of tying event management to your CMDB and being able to show a service impact and a service, which services are impacted by an event or an outage, as well as your planned maintenance activities. So certainly it becomes an alternative or an option. And so a lot of what we showed obviously is not dependent on Service Watch, but could be a Service Watch could complement what we did and kind of do some of those same activities as well. I think one thing that Service Watch I think it's probably hard to do with Service Watch or any auto discovery tool is really to get those service-to-service relationships. Because in a lot of regards, the service-to-service stuff is really, you have to interrogate, like in my example, you'd have to interrogate either our identity management software, you'd have to interrogate our Concur expense management software to see that there is some interconnectivity between those two applications that one depends on another. And that's usually something a lot of discovery tools don't do.
Right, and to add to that, the Service Watch activity, if you remember that slide I showed where there was the double line and above the line was the service and below the line was the discovered infrastructure, most of it's down in the discovered infrastructure, and it does bleed up over that line, but the truth is the service-to-service connectivity can be managed proactively, right? We should know if we're consuming a service. And we can manage that. So it's always accurate if we're following that process correctly for consumption and using configuration management.
Great. Jeff, I think this one's for you. Do you see customers who are using CMDB to their benefit without automated discovery? Specifically, is it realistic to maintain relationships among services and sub-services manually?
I think I just answered that question.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, right. I do think, I was going to say, I will say, I think the service-to-service or service-to-sub-service relationships, I do think are manageable in a manual way, as Don indicated. It's not as dynamic, I guess. I will say, to get down and solve a lot of those problems that may be a monitoring tool or event management tool up to a service, those can oftentimes be very difficult if you're not using an auto discovery tool to keep that infrastructure interrelationships kind of mapped and defined.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct, right? I mean, I agree with you, Jeff. At least at the highest level, without any discovery, and without active discovery, you do know who's consuming from me and who my consuming from, right? So you could pretty easily have event notification just by monitoring those service outages or those service notifications, right, if there was something happening. And in configuration and change, if change is a manual process with a big cab, well, if you go to the cab and you're running a service and you've got a proposed change, you have all your customers with you, right, automatically, so you know everybody who's affected. And so you can also build those approvals or reviews in the change process without discovery. When you showed your example of being an approver of the change, it was because of the service-to-service linkage that you were considered, right? So there's a lot that can be done from a service-to-service, manager perspective without the discovery capability.
Okay, a few quick things. We are getting to the end of our time. So if you're interested in I do have some more questions, and if I missed your question, please resubmit it. We had a lot today, so I did a lot of scrolling. But if you're interested in that service taxonomy framework that Don mentioned, probably the easiest.
Definitions document.
I'm sorry, definitions document. Sorry.
Sorry.
Definitions document. So actually, someone asked me about the service taxonomy framework, which I think was 2 weeks ago. Either one of those, email me at marketing@evergreensys.com. Again, it's marketing@evergreensys.com, and I will get you in touch with the correct person. We'll get that to you. I do have a couple more questions, so if you can stick around, please do. Let's see. Jeff, tell me if I asked you this one already. In the demo, there seemed to be the possibility of a lot of approvers on a change. Is this common?
So I don't think you asked that one yet.
Okay.
I think it's certainly possible, right? Obviously, it then kind of goes to some of the questions around relationship sprawl and having tons of relationships. I think where we see possibly a challenge in the example that I kind of demoed today is if you're making a change to some core configuration component, maybe like a critical switch or router that most, if not all, services depend on. Obviously, you could have every service owner in there to define and approve that change. And I'll say in general, having the service owner approve the change is probably more of a choice than kind of a requirement. But I would say that I would want a service owner to be made aware of any kind of material change that impacts their service. And so this may take, might take the form of a notification over an approval. And I think in general, you want to kind of strike a balance between having those appropriate controls in place as well as what's practical from a business sense.
Right. I mean, this is where RACI is a valuable tool, right? Because you're right. You don't have to have everyone approve. You can have people that are aware, that are communicated with, and that sort of thing. And then if they have an exception, they can raise it. Otherwise, it is a matter of streamlining.
Okay, great. Jeff, what if our CMDB data is bad or unreliable?
I think obviously some of the kind of hits on maybe the core topics of our conversation today. I mean, without having reliable, usable CMDB data, and relationships, our service catalog is not going to be as empowered, right? We're going to have a hard time communicating to our consumers and, as well as help our service owners actually better manage their service. I will say this is we do have started a lot of CMDB projects of late where this is the goal, is really to start with kind of improving the accuracy of the CMDB data. It might be moving from something like 40% accurate as an estimate to something like 95% accurate. And these tend to start with, kind of an assessment to understand kind of the current state of how that configuration data is being captured, managed, and maybe most importantly, governed. And then obviously we'd turn that into actions and things like auto discovery we'd use some of the management dashboards you talked about today, governance plans. Don mentioned RACI, having good clarity on RACI. There are some tools, like ServiceNow has a data certification plugin to kind of audit and correct CMDB errors that can be leveraged as well to help manage those anomalies.
Yeah, I'd like to make this clarification too. For the inaccurate CMDB, if you think about that slide, that inaccurate set is the discovered infrastructure, right? And if we're talking about starting at the top and mapping a couple of key services from the top down, we're not even going to be using that discovered infrastructure to map our service relationships. We don't have to. I mean, it's great if it's good, but we can start at our service level and say who's providing to us. And Jeff, in your example for expense management, you have an identity management requirement, right? It's part of your workflow. So you're consuming identity management. You don't have to discover it to know it. Okay? So you think about it that way. We're talking about mapping top down your service relationships, not discovered. And so frankly, for the start of this exercise in the account, I don't care if the CMDB data is bad or not. They probably don't have what we're talking about in there anyhow.
Another question, how would the service-to-service relationships be discovered? Jeff, I don't know, did you cover that? Yeah, I know we talked a little bit about discovery.
I think we covered it from a couple different angles. And again, we're kind of saying it's probably possible to discover it from an auto discovery perspective, though it's usually not something that's plug and play. It usually takes some effort to determine those interrelationships between one service and that of another.
Okay, and someone's asking if we currently offer a workshop for the development of the CMDB, like our service catalog workshop. I don't know that we have one currently on our website.
Actually, it's not on the website, but we do have one, yes, and we can follow up with you on that.
Okay, so again, anyone interested in that, if you email me at marketing@evergreensys.com, we'll make sure we get that info to you. One last question. Don, we need to drive IT efficiency, we need to drive IT efficiency, not just a great customer service. How do you help your clients do both?
That's like a $5 question. I have to give someone $5 for that one. Okay, because that is the topic of our next webinar. We decided today it's going to be about the combination of beautiful service and IT operational efficiency, how they do exist together, and one creates the other and vice versa. So, there is a terrific opportunity for IT efficiency, through all the stuff we're talking about, and we're going to go through that in the next webinar. But I can tell you at a high level, if we, we have a principle we call balanced design, which does that, and that is give the customer what they want to get what we need. So if we can begin, we understand what they need, we understand the customer's needs, then we can limit their choices by guiding them towards 3 or 4 really good standard services that meet 70 to 80% of their needs. So all of a sudden you can feel that choice set shrinking down. And we then design those services for nice, beautiful but simple self-service where the customer enjoys the experience, and then their selections lead them to one of 3 or 4 standard services. Well, as soon as we've only got 3 or 4 standard services in that particular area instead of hundreds, okay, we can highly automate, maybe even make those unattended from an IT execution standpoint. So the 2 pieces work together to drive that really interesting outcome. And I mean, if you think about Amazon, that's what Amazon does. As a shopper, you're doing everything through self-service experience, and your activities are driving it down to a funnel of a certain number of choices that are then automated. And the analogy is fairly accurate, I have to say. It's a fairly accurate thing, right? So we can give better service and lower costs, and that is the next webinar.
Okay, great. I think I got all the questions. Yes, for those of you who asked, I will be sending out an email no later than tomorrow afternoon with a link to this presentation recording and the slides. And again, if you're interested in any of those guides that were referenced, email me at marketing@evergreensys. That's evergreensys.com, please, and that way I have your contact information, and we will follow up with you. So our next webinar, I believe, is on Friday the 16th. I will be putting that information on the resources tab of Evergreen Sys later this week. So we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.